Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
I'd like to thank Howard for coming by, all the way from Altamont. He's not really a rock star, but he's got some eye problems, so he's going to be wearing his sunglasses. So I want you to think he's trying to... But Howard's retired from the New York State Department of Transportation, and way back he was speechwriter and advisor to Congresswoman Bella Abzug, and he writes political commentaries on the local papers. You probably read them. And he's a frequent guest with Dr. Joe Parisi on Saturday afternoons. So I'd like to thank Howard for coming over and suggesting the book. The book is called Just How Stupid Are We? Facing the Truth About the American Voter by Rick Shenkman. So here's Howard Brock to tell us about it. And so here we go.
Good afternoon. Sorry about the glasses, but I've got to wear them. I'm glad I called this meeting for all those who are interested in finding out how stupid they are. How stupid we are. And this book by Mr. Shenkman, I ought to give you his background first. He is an Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter and New York Times best-selling author, editor and founder of George Mason University's History News Network, a website that features articles by historians on current events, an associate professor of history at George Mason University. He appears regularly as a commentator on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. His books include Legends, Lies, and Cherished Myths of American History and Presidential Ambition. His observations about the 2008 election can be followed on his blog, How Stupid. He's in love with the word stupid. But when Joe Nash recommended or asked me to come and talk about the last election, I suggested this book. And I must say I'm a little sorry I did so. He confuses, as I knew he probably would. We've got to understand that title of How Stupid, Just How Stupid Are We, is a marketing tool. And because they thought if he just said how much are we victims of apathy or ignorance or some such thing, that wouldn't sell as much, but it catches the eye. How stupid are we? And he says, pretty much in the beginning, we have put our fate in the hands of the people, the same folks who, by and large, one, find politics boring, and two, are ignorant and irrational about public affairs. And that would include most of us, I think. But he defines stupidity thusly. Just a moment now. I'll find it. Five defining characteristics of stupidity, it seems to me, are readily apparent. First is sheer ignorance of critical facts about important events in the news, and ignorance of how our government functions and who's in charge. So he immediately confuses stupidity with ignorance. I am ignorant of a whole mess of things. I'm sure some of you are too. And that doesn't make me stupid. Other things probably do, but this doesn't make me stupid. I constantly, when I tell my wife that she's ignorant, she takes umbrage and thinks I'm calling her stupid. And I have to rush to tell her that, no, I'm not accusing you of being stupid. I'm accusing you of being ignorant of the facts or ignorant of the subject, which she is now and then, and which I am. I know nothing about physics, for instance. And if anyone wanted to test me on that, I'd be in a sorry shape indeed. Now, second, he says, is negligence. the disinclination to seek reliable sources of information about important news events. Well, that's more of a trenchant criticism. If we are apathetic because we're lazy, we're then coming about to committing those sins that he's accusing it of. Third is wooden-headedness, as the historian Barbara Tuchman defined it, the inclination to believe that what we want to believe, regardless of the facts. And Barbara Tuchman was very agile in applying this standard, and she wrote about, among other things, in her book. What's the title of the book? I got a senior moment for a moment. Anyway, the book March to Folly. That was the March to Folly. She discussed various things through history, which was included the Revolutionary War. And first she went back to ancient history, and she had the Battle of Troy, the Revolutionary War, some other wars, and she came up to the Vietnam situation, and she showed how wooden-headedness and stupid we were during that period in which we devised our policy toward Vietnam. And more about Vietnam in a minute. Fourth is short-sightedness, the support of public policies that are mutually exclusive are contrary to the country's long-term interests. Well, we know that people often vote against their own interests. And Mr. Frank wrote a book on that recently. I can't remember his first name. Very recently wrote a book about that. And fifth and finally is a broad category I call boneheadedness, for want of a better word. The susceptibility to meaningless phrases, stereotypes, irrational biases, and simplistic diagnoses and solutions that play on our hopes and fears. But that is generally known about what the electorate is about. The electorate is subject to all sorts of influences, propaganda, lies, everything that can be played on their sympathies and their hatreds, they respond to. We know, for instance, that the Iraq War was a failure, and he cites the Iraq War as among the first examples of it. The Iraq War with the lies about WMD and the lies about the fact that Saddam was aiding and allied with the terrorists. And this is probably the worst situation in Iran. They wanted to declare a war on Iran since before Bush became president. It was known in the memos compiled by Bill Kristol and his allies that the United States should make a power play in the Middle East and should invade Iraq. But the people didn't realize this when the president was saying this and the vice president was saying. And during the election, Cheney even went so far as to say, if the Democratic candidate is elected, we are in danger of another attack by the Muslims. Well, I think that it would have been a far more effective argument if he bundled or connected the Vietnam War with the Iraqi War. It is amazing to me that only 20 years after we stopped the war in Vietnam, or we were stopped because we were defeated there, we started another one in Iraq, just 20 years apart. And, excuse me, over those 20 years, we committed our soldiers and our sailors and our Marines. And in Vietnam, it was even worse because we committed our draftees over there. And we had something like 50-some-odd thousand casualties. And it was all a bundle of lies. The actions of Lyndon Johnson, this was a Democratic mistake, and then there was a Republican mistake. the actions of Lyndon Johnson in the Bay of Tonkin resolution were false actions. It was a creation of the government about the Bay of Tonkin action by the North Vietnamese, and we had to respond to it. Well, they made that up as an excuse because they wanted to go to war. And why did we want to go to war? Because I remember very vividly a soldier being sent overseas to fight in Vietnam, and the reporter asked him what his reactions were, and he said, well, if we don't fight him there, we'll fight him right here in San Francisco. He was leaving from San Francisco. Well, that was a myth, and one of the myths we live by. It is really astounding to me that we fell for those myths again. So I can say, in my opinion, that 40-year period was subject to more stupidity by the American people and by their governments than any period in the United States. We were just talking about the Mexican War, the lady and I. The Mexican War was a imperialistic war. There was no doubt about it. Pierce had imperialistic views on the Mexicans, and now we're trying to stop the Mexicans to come over and take the land that we stole from them in 1848. So much of what he had to say in this book was not a stark revelation to me or anybody who's been slightly active in politics, but the conclusions he came to at the end of the book were not very startling either. He said we can't. By the way, one of the things myths that we live by, he says, that affects our opinion, is the concept of the people of the United States. There is no people of the United States. There are peoples of the United States, different peoples that we have to recognize in our political actions. And I think most politicians realize this. They talk about the people of the United States to excite the electorate, but they well know that it is the peoples of the United States. The people who live in Georgia and the people who live in New York City are entirely different peoples. And they have to find some way to coalesce all of these in a solid majority to win an election. Now, we have been pretty well divided in this country in the last 30 years in our elections. It's been 40 years after, actually, the Nixon-Kennedy election was very close. Also, except for Reagan, the elections were close, and for one Bush election. Carter, even though he was running immediately after Watergate, won by something like only 2 points. And the rest of elections were kind of close. Clinton won by 5 points, I think, and anyway, we are a closely divided nation. And we've come to realize that we've got to put various peoples together in coalitions to achieve a victory. Now, what he has said in his conclusions is, and the only one that really affected me was that Americans once again have to be trained or educated in physics. When I went to public school, we got and that's many, many years ago, we got an education in civics, that is not given today. I don't know why it isn't. I think Jay Leno on his show from now and again goes out into the street and asks people simple questions about the Constitution and the country they live in, and they don't know the answers. They don't know the answers to simple questions. So he comes up with a scheme for teaching civics, not physics, civics to the American people. And I'm for that. It's a very strong proposition, but there have been many others who've proposed it. And he have certain other reasons for or solutions for solving these problems that he presents. Holding political parties, get-togethers to make the politics a social event, because there has to be an element of social event in it in order to capture people's attention and foment their enthusiasm. Aside from that, I wasn't terribly excited by any of the reasons he had. I wonder what you think is the problem. Do you think that American people are stupid as he does, or do you think that we're not? And do you think, by the way, do you mind telling me how many Republicans and Democrats are in the House? Would you raise your arms if you're a Democrat? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And Republicans? 1, 2, 3, 4. Republicans are outnumbered, 3 to 1. If, according to, we could draw from him that the only one who are reliable voters who will vote on the issues and vote constantly, are Republicans and Democrats. Committed liberals, he doesn't say this in the book, but he implies it. Committed conservatives and liberals will vote certain ways, but there are people who are independent now, who consider themselves independent. Only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 independents. Independents, now you got to be careful, because you might be included in a list of stupid people, according to his definition. Do you think that that we are stupid and that we can't overcome our prejudices and propaganda and so forth? Somebody tell us now. Anybody here want to speak? Yes.
Well, yeah, I took some exception to his title, because the way I've looked at it in this country, and I focus first on Bush, is I don't see him as stupid. I see him as a smart guy who does a lot of stupid things. And so I use, instead of the word to be, to say we are stupid, I say instead we're smart, not stupid, but we do stupid things. And we all do that. You know, we've all, nobody escapes that. And it's a question of how we gauge, you know, what stupidities, you know, are do us in or not do us in. But I put it in slightly different slant.
You're a Democrat?
No, I'm independent.
Independent.
And so,
well, it seems to me that Bush...
And I am that way since the fall of '92. I have, since that time, on the state and federal level, I have never voted for a candidate on the Democrat or Republican line. And the reason for that is that I heard this report by Brooks Jackson on CNN in that fall, which was revelatory to me, namely that these corporations in this country were given nearly the same amount of money to each party. They might vary a little bit, like the drug industry might give $2 million to the Republicans at the time, but at the same time they were giving $1.5 million to the Democrats. And I knew this kind of thing existed, but I didn't realize they bought out both sides. And since that time, I just could not sanction. And so I'm waiting for something basic to change in the way, in our political process, where money does not determine...
Well, this time, of course, Obama reportedly got most of his funds, or a good deal of his funds, from the internet, and small dosage.
I'm interested in excuse me, but I'm interested in getting what proportion of it was. I know that was a big factor, but I somehow got the impression towards the end of the campaign that the majority of his money by far came from...
I don't think it was a majority. He got a good chunk of it from the big donors. But I don't think it was a majority. Now,
I don't know, but
we may not need some of the restrictions on presented by the McCain-Feingold Act if we are getting contributions now spread out through the small voter via the internet. I don't know what that is either yet. There has to be an analysis made. Yeah. As far as Bush's intelligence goes, I used to think he was stupid, but I was stupid in thinking that. He's a very smart man. He's gotten most of what he wanted. And when you think about it, he got, although the Iraqi war has resulted in an enhanced status for Iran. And they didn't want that, evidently. Iran is much stronger now than they were before the war. That's just on a practical analysis of the result. Yes. The gentleman in the back?
I really don't know where you're coming from when you say he's a smart man. Anything they got through was through manipulation by Rhodes, Harriet Myers, and people of that caliber, who did a lot of it in a clandestine way. This man is detached. You can see what it is now in the lame duck period. God knows what's going to happen in 2 months, because he's undoing through executive orders all sorts of environment.
Yes, I know.
Please.
But that's just what I'm saying. I'm not saying how he did it. The methods by which he used to get it, he got it. That's the result.
Having, excuse my phrase, a bunch of crooks around him. I mean, Rove now is being in Wall Street Journal as the great boom.
Yeah.
But some of the things that Rove did, and Harriet Myers, they have defied the Congress with legitimate subpoenas. You know, I mean, we're talking about people who have acted out of the law, and we're saying they're smart. They're crooks.
They may be crooks, I don't know. But we're never going to find out because we passed up any...
Excuse me, you don't think people defying legitimate subpoenas is not outside the law?
They have defied the legitimate subpoenas, but they've done it on a legal basis, I believe. Look, I am not standing here as an excuser for the great decider. I'm definitely not. He's been a terrible, terrible president. And even some Republicans are coming to that conclusion. After all, when your approval rating is 25%, that means even the conservatives have deserted you. But he goes on through it. He smiles all the time, as someone just said that recently. He smiles all the time. He doesn't seem to be hurt by the falling ratings that he's getting. Yes, someone in the back wanted to talk. Yes.
I think part of the confusion is we've got to introduce another concept having to do with stupid or smart or ignorant, and that's intelligent. Yeah. I think that Bush is intelligent, but I don't think he's applied his intelligence. When you become smart by applying your intelligence. You're ignorant if you know nothing all about it.
Right.
But I think the guy's intelligent. I think Reagan was intelligent, but I think that neither one applied their intelligence to make themselves more useful and to make fewer mistakes.
Well, it depends upon what their goals were.
The biggest, I'm going to tell you what his goal is, and I think the biggest mistake they made was increasing the deficit by $5 trillion
yes.
and dropping regulation to the point where we got a disaster, and now we have the government stepping, I'm going to say it the way they would. The government is going to step in and take over the auto industries, or take over financial institutions. They're investing in financial institutions. This is socialism. So this is what they want.
Let me tell you something about socialism.
No, I don't believe it's socialism, but that's what they call it.
Well,
that's not what they want.
They call socialism, but that's an interesting phrase. We do not have, and never have, a free market in this country. That's one of the myths that some of the voters swallow. We have never had a free market in this country. We have always sustained and given aid to major industries, the oil industry, the beet industry, the sugar industry, other industries, copper, I think, and I don't even know what they are. And there are some now, of course, that are too big to fail. We find that out. They're too big to fail. Citibank, for instance, or Citigroup is too big to fail. So we've rescued them.
Well, that's not what they intended. That's not their goal.
What?
The whole Bush administration, the last 8 years, their intention was to separate us from the government, not to rely on the government. Why do you think they want to privatize Social Security?
Yeah, but that is a myth.
Of course it is.
They're not ready to give up the subsidies of industry that they give them every year. I think it comes to $50 or $80 billion.
But But that's not socialism anyway. That's government regulation and involvement. That goes back to Teddy Roosevelt, who was a Republican.
Yeah.
Socialism is government ownership of the means of production.
Well, it is.
And we don't have anything like that, and never have, and no one's imagining anything
But
like that.
we consider socialism aid from the government to private enterprise.
I don't consider that at all.
Well, most people do. Most people do.
Well, I don't think most educated people do feel that that's what socialism is.
No, that's not the definition of socialism. That's the owner of
That's
the means of
welfare
production by what? Excuse me.
state. That's the welfare state. That's government involvement in the well-being of the overall society, which involves regulation.
Yes, but most people say that is the step toward socialism, or that what we're involved in now is socialism. I'm trying to tell you that it is not socialism, because we've been doing it for many, many years, and aiding private industry while we do other things on a private basis. Yes, did someone else want to say? Yes. Yes.
To quote Zsa Gabor, what we need in this country is more socialism for the rich. And that's what we're getting now via the Republicans. Look, this whole epithet about socialism is a joke. Our biggest allies are a mixed economy, greatly socialist. England, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, a good many of the NATO countries. You know, this came up with McCain. He's socialist. You know, it's like back when they were yelling about Absa being a communist. It's an epithet. It doesn't hold up to reality.
Who?
Absa.
Oh, Absa. Oh, she was a radical sometimes. She never was a communist. Yes.
Which they labeled her.
Yeah. Was there anybody else here?
Cameraman has a question.
Yes.
What do you think about what's going on in Thailand?
You know, I'm not wholly, but almost ignorant of that, of the situation that's going on in Thailand. I was just reading about it this morning. I can't comment on it because I don't know enough about it.
Well, just my question really was specific to their complaint that they don't want all of those people voting. All of those people who have been manipulated by the government by giving them bailouts.
Yeah. That's interesting you should bring that up, because that's part of this book. He notes very correctly, I think, that most conservatives at a time previous were very, very skeptical of spreading democracy. After all, the founders of our Constitution, the founders of our country, were not either were they confident in the people. They wanted checks on the people as well as they wanted checks on various forms of the government. And they did with the Electoral College, which I think is outgrown its usefulness and should be disposed of. They did it with very many, well, there was selection of the senators. We didn't start out in this democracy, so-called democracy, as a country which voted for our senators. It was done by the state. They would decided how they would choose and select senatorial candidates for the Congress. There were numerous checks on the power of the people. And conservatives were consistently noting that. For instance, William F. Buckley was very definitely against the various methods for expanding the vote. He didn't, I think there's a quote in here that I could, I can't find it now. But there was a quote in the book by William F. Buckley in which he stated how distasteful he was in extending the vote to very many people. And conservatives regularly took that point of view. Now, they're all for the little guy because they realized the little guy was electing them. And now conservatives, as well as liberals, are for extending the vote as far as possible. And of course, in this last election, we had the vote of the blacks in the South, as well as the North, all over, extending the vote to the blacks. And you know what? We elected a black president for the first time in many, many years. Now, I was very pessimistic about the results coming up. I thought McCain was going to win the election, and he might well have if the financial meltdown didn't occur. When it did, after all, he came out of the Republican convention with Sarah Palin ahead of Obama, not by too many points, but 3 or 4 points. But it was not until the meltdown that Obama surged upward in the polls. I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, the election was, the blacks were involved in the election, and they elected a black president. Also, they didn't elect it entirely on a black vote. There had to be many whites who decided to vote for a black, or were so overcome by the results of the meltdown that they forgot any prejudices they had, and they voted for the Democratic candidate. They mostly go for Democrats in bad times. I remember saying a year ago or so that it looks like there will have to be a depression for the Democrats to win the presidency again. Well, voila. We're pretty close to that depression now, aren't we? At least to some sources. So I don't know what's going to become of this, whether we're going to extend the vote even further, where many conservative elements are for restricting immigration and bringing that under control. As I say, we're trying to hold the Mexican back from the country that we stole in 1846. But it's ours, possession is 9/10 of the law, and now we have to do that. We are told that we have to do that. Well, it's only 1:45. We can go on for a while? Okay. Is there anybody else? Now let's get a little more community discussion into this. Is there anybody else that has a solution to the fact that the voters are susceptible, open to many influences, which include lies, manipulations of various sorts? What can you do? Do you feel you were susceptible to that came over the tube? By the way, he enlists in television as one of the evils in our society right now, and it's probably right about that. When we get our election comes in dribs and drabs in 30-second spots and 60-second spots, and on the news comes in events that aren't worth more than a minute worth of coverage by the networks or the stations. What else? What do we do about that? Were you ever susceptible to lies and manipulations and propaganda, etc.? How about you and the couple back there? No, you.
Me?
No, the couple right there. No? Anybody? Did you feel you were susceptible to lies or misrepresentations of various things that you learned later were false, that you were told that influenced your votes? No?
The talk show hosts.
What?
Right-wing talk show hosts influence people.
Yeah. Yes.
Are you saying that we're exposed to lies or susceptible to lies?
Well, did you feel that you were exposed to lies or to manipulations or to propaganda during the election? Did it sway your vote one way or the other? No one admits to being a victim of this. It's interesting. Just a minute. I was saying that the two biggest losers in this election campaign was Rush Limbaugh and Bill Clinton, one on each side. Rush Limbaugh and Bill Clinton. Why? Because a lot of the people that Limbaugh appealed to, with his, I think, flat distortions, didn't go for the candidate that he wanted to go. Although he was not a great supporter of John McCain's, but he lost this election very personally, I could see, as a result, and he has been eating sour grapes ever since. He called those who voted for Obama stupid, and Obama was a Chicago thug. But and then there was Clinton on the other side, who lost his reputation for a spokesman for the black people almost overnight. And he has now had to come across with information about his various activities in order for his wife to become Secretary of State. By the way, what do you think of the nominations for the cabinet? That would be interesting. Anybody got their opinion of what Obama's done with his cabinet, Hillary Clinton, et cetera? Yes.
The only one that I have a little concern with is the home security, the governor of Arizona.
Yeah, Arizona. Yeah.
She has had a lot of experience in Arizona with the line between Arizona and Mexico, but I don't know that she has had a lot of exposure to other things because this is so global.
I don't know anything about her. She may have.
Maybe she's read a lot. I don't know.
Yes.
If she's talking about Governor.
That was a good point, though. I had not thought of that. She doesn't have any experience as far as I can see her.
Napolitano in Arizona?
Yeah.
With the wall going up there? And
She's got that kind of experience.
She's
I'm
had
saying
plenty
as
of
far as
experience.
the global threats that we're seeing that all over the world, I don't...
Well, nobody has had experience with terrorists anyway. The current head of the Home Security.
Worse than Chernobyl.
What?
She could not do any worse than Chernobyl.
Oh, yeah. No, that would be worse than Chernobyl.
You asked before a question and you got off on it.
What was that?
Were there any elections where you fell for lies or misstatements?
Yeah.
I can think of one that stands out. It was 1960. Kennedy and the Democrats that year came out and said there was a big missile gap under the Eisenhower administration, which there wasn't, and that we were not protecting. Do you remember these names, Colonie and Matsu?
Yes.
The two islands?
Yes, I remember very well.
Both of those statements.
But I don't think Kennedy brought Colonie and Matsu up. He didn't bring them up.
That we were not protecting them, along with there was a missile gap.
I don't think you may be right, but I don't recall that he brought Colonie and Matsu up. I thought it was Nixon, or maybe it came from an outside source.
Why would Nixon bring it up? They had 8 years of Republicans in office.
It may have come up from an outside question.
Eisenhower administration was 52 to 60.
I remember Kennedy being very uncomfortable with that issue, but you may be right. I don't recall. But it's interesting that nobody says that you had trouble with certain propagandas or misstatements or anything else with your vote. You were in trouble by the fact that they were being made. Didn't influence your vote in any way, made you waver or made you change your mind. Nobody had that experience.
Well, if I went back 40 years, I'd say things that my revelation or my change in looking at politics and government operations can be changed during the Vietnam period in the 60s. And until then,
were you aware in Vietnam what was really going on? Do you think?
I began to see through a lot of things that I had looked at according to the prevailing dogma at the time, the prevailing way of looking at things. And so since that time, I just go on, I hold circumspect a lot of what comes across. So to answer your question in regard to this last time, virtually not, because it just didn't, I'm not into that.
Yeah.
No, not where I was 40 years ago.
It is interesting that during the Vietnam War, who heard of the expression "the best and the brightest"?
Well, I David Halberstam.
Sheehan.
We had working for us then the best and the brightest, Rusk and, I forgot.
McNamara.
What?
McNamara.
McNamara and the brothers.
Bundy, George Bundy.
Yeah, McMundy and I'm trying to think of the brothers' names, but I can't think of them now. The senior moments are coming more and more lately. Yeah, we had the best and the brightest. And we're now going along with Obama because he seemingly is picking again the best and the brightest. They are now in power in our government now. Yes, you were one is. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Several years ago, I went to Williams College, and I asked the professor why we stumbled in Vietnam and other places, and he said we didn't have an educated mind, and I've used that term. I voted for Obama not because he was black. I voted because he had an educated mind.
Yeah.
He knew the past. He had wisdom about what had happened. Here we went into Vietnam. We were fearful of the Russians. We were fearful of communism. And that was not the problem.
No.
So that's the guide that I use. Now, you may like Bush. He's a pleasant guy. He's funny at times. But he doesn't have an educated mind. He doesn't know his history. He has blundered. He didn't even know the history of the country he was invading.
Yes.
And so that's my guide now. Do they know their history? Have they acquired wisdom about the past? Are there lessons that they've learned? Do they know the history of the different countries so they don't blunder and bring us death at our doors? And we as a nation must accept the guilt. We voted for him. We didn't challenge the way he was elected because we did not have educated minds. So as a retired teacher, I think it's a function now that our children come out knowing the past, having some understanding
Definitely.
of what and why and how.
That is lacking among our children now. Even the educated ones. Even those who are educated for mathematics and science. Yes, what do you?
The book you just quoted, The Best and the Brightest,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful book by David Halberstam,
Yes.
who was cut off in life very productive years. With regard to that war, I mean, and McCain in the background also says that the people that they took defeat into victory, that it was stolen. If you go back, not over David Halberstam, but in a CBS, Walter Cronkite went over and visited, came back and made one broadcast, and Johnson said, if that's what his analysis is,
He's lost.
He lost.
Yeah. You stop to think where we've been through over the last 50 years, the assassination of Kennedy, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, which I think had a greater political and social effect than the killing of his brother. After all, if he hadn't been killed, he probably would have won the nomination. We wouldn't have had Watergate. We wouldn't have had an extended stay in Vietnam. God knows what else we would have had. But the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, and then the Nixon years, then opening of China, but also Watergate, and then the Carter years, the whole mess in Iran, the hostage mess in Iran, and Reagan with the whole mess in arms for Iran. And it's been the quietest thing was administration was actually Clinton's. He had the quietest administrations of both, and then of course we had 9/11 with Bush, and then the invasion of Iraq, and now the big problem with Iran. Iran, which, by the way, we overthrew Mossadegh, the democratically elected leader, in 1953, and we're still paying for doing that under the leadership of the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles, who was the director of the CIA at the time, overthrew Mossadegh and set up the Shah, and eventually backfired on us, and is still backfiring on us. All of these occurrences during the last 50 years has just been tremendous. I don't think there's been any time like it in the history of the United States, not even with World War II, which was a pretty cut and dried situation, and it lasted only 3 years. We've won all the wars we were in until Vietnam and Iraq, and we have the influence of the military in this country has now become incredible. We all talk about how Americans are fighting in broadland. There are 700 military bases that the Americans have around the world. Imagine 700 military bases around the world. And we're now committed to something we can't handle any longer. We've got to find a new course, a change course. I don't know what the change is that Obama's going to make. I know he's going to disappoint me some ways. He's already disappointed me. But we've got to find some new path, some new way to handle these myriad of problems. We've got to go back from this extreme military commitment we've made around the world. And I'm hoping that now is the time, and Obama is the person to bring this change to us that we so badly needed. Thank you very much.
Anyone else have a question? Or?
Anybody have an additional question?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Which could be answered maybe over the space of an hour, but how do you feel that either the electoral process or the voting process could be improved in the United States?
How to?
Yeah.
In other words, you wanted me to make the conclusions that he didn't make. I don't know what the answer to this problem is. I don't know if it's exactly the problem that he illustrates it to be. He goes on about the problem of the people that he says. I don't know what the answer is. Well, one thing we could do, we should do, is eliminate the Electoral College. I don't know if we ever will, because it's undemocratic, and it means that there'll be no campaigning in New York or California or Texas or Georgia or a myriad of other states, because they're already decided. This lady was telling me that she gets no calls and stops from the young people now, and I told her that that's probably because New York State doesn't matter in the election anymore. It doesn't, because it's pretty much concluded long before the election. If we eliminated the Electoral College, New York would count, California would count, Texas would count, Georgia would count. And I think we ought to do that. There's some talk about it after every election, but nothing comes of it.
Okay, well, thanks, Howard.
Another question.
One proposal that might improve our electoral system, especially for people who are independents here, is that we should have, like Australia has, a two-tiered election. That is, the first election, anybody can run who wants to run, and the two candidates that get the largest number of votes then run in the second election, and of those two candidates, one of them is going to will win the election. That'll help put pressure on the political parties to be more responsive to the needs of the people. I mean, this is a concern that independents have.
Well, you had something like that in California on the recall election, which Schwarzenberger won. They had
I'm talking about it as a matter of course, so that if you, for example, wish to vote for Ralph Nader, who is more to the left of the Democratic Party, you could do that without being concerned that you're giving a vote out to the conservatives. Because, of course, a vote for Nader is taking a vote away from the Democratic Party, in effect giving it to the Republican Party. you could do that in this first-tier election. Nader, for example, or, well, Perot would have been a better example. Perot might have actually been one of the top two winners in that first tier, so he'd actually get to run. What would he run as, a conservative or a liberal? I'm not quite sure. He's sort of, I think he's a conservative. And then he'd be running against a liberal, and then you would get an opportunity to vote.
Well, you know, somebody's always saying on the radio show that I do, always when this comes up, they say, we need a new third party or fourth party. I don't see how it can be done.
Well, the fourth, that's why I'm telling you, I'm just giving you a way it can be done.
I know, but how do you discern from the married candidates who are in the election? I said it at Schwarzenegger thing. Schwarzenegger won because he had the name, because he was a glamorous candidate. All of those behind him just dropped off. And I remember one of the Democratic experts saying that the Democratic candidate will win because he has the support of special interests. But Schwarzenegger overcame all that with his...
He would have been one of the candidates, and you get to vote against him in the second election.
I don't think so.
Because you don't like his name, I guess.
What? I don't like his name?
Well, I'm saying, you know, he won because of his name, or he's well-known, he's familiar to people. You'll get a chance to vote against him twice. You can vote against him in the first set of elections, and you can vote against him when he becomes one of the top two and he's running against someone else.
Yeah.
The first time he ran, you have to remember, Ray Davis, they had pulled him. He had won the Democratic and didn't even finish his term.
That's right.
You talked about a recall. But there's no doubt about it, Schwarzenegger is popular.
Yeah, well, anybody like him would be popular. Reagan was phenomenally popular. Any actor would be popular. I don't think I don't know how you would overcome that. I don't know how you would start a third or fourth party that will be effective and have an impact on it. It's, you know, I say the Democrats are better than the Republicans. Most of you know, listen, I declare myself as a liberal. I never said the Democrats are perfect. They're far from perfect. But it seems to me on balance that you'd have to go with them. The Republicans are a laissez-faire party, and the Democrats want some regulation. The Republicans are more militant on foreign affairs. The Democrats want to try negotiation. To me, that's simplified, but it's a better thing. The Democrats are a better option than the Republicans. I don't think they're perfect. I think they're very unperfect, and I've criticized them sharply before the 1906 election. 1906 election, yes. And I will continue to criticize him. I'll criticize Obama when he disappoints me, as I say he already has. I think he has made some very questionable appointments for the cabinet. I don't think Hillary Clinton is going to make a good appointment because he's going to have Bill Clinton around his neck, and he's part of her. And I don't think that some of the other appointments are very good. Summer was an originator, along with Robert Rubin, of the deregulation, which was passed during the Clinton administration, part of the deregulation which is haunting us now. So he has a lot of, from my viewpoint, a lot of shortcomings to answer for. But I'm for him because I think he'd be a better agent of change. He was not my first choice, neither was Hillary, but he's been elected now, and I think it's very good that we elected a black president. It does wonders for us with the world. It changes the world view of us, and I think it could lead to great success. I really, really hope so. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.